two little girls were abandoned at a bus stop. They didn't know the man who found them was a billionaire. And he didn't know they were about to change his life forever. It was a cold, gray evening on the outskirts of New York. The streets were unusually quiet, the air filled with a heavy stillness that seemed to press down on everything. A light drizzle had begun to fall, leaving dark patches on the pavement and painting the world in muted shades of gray. Near an old bus stop, where paint peeled from the metal bench and an old glass panel hung cracked and stained, two little girls stood huddled together. They were no more than 5 years old, identical in their small frames, big brown eyes, and soft chestnut hair that curled slightly at the ends. One wore a pale pink dress, the other green, and both had matching pink backpacks strapped tightly to their backs as if those were the only things in the world they still had to hold on to. They looked around anxiously, eyes darting between every car that passed, every pedestrian who hurried by. But no one stopped. No one even noticed them. Chloe, the one in green, rubbed her eyes with a tiny fist, trying to hide the tears. Lily, the one in pink, tried to look brave, but her lips trembled. They didn't speak much, just stood there silently, gripping each other's hands. A sleek black Maybach rolled up to the curb nearby, its engine humming quietly. From the front door of the nearby building walked a tall man in a tailored light blue suit, his dark hair combed with meticulous care, his expression unreadable behind a pair of pale blue eyes that rarely betrayed emotion. This was Alexander Blake, CEO of one of the most powerful medical tech corporations in the country. People knew him as ruthless, brilliant, unshakably composed. He wasn't the type to notice the world beyond numbers and contracts. But just as he opened the car door, something made him pause. A strange stillness in the corner of his vision. He turned his head and saw them, two small girls, alone, vulnerable, completely out of place. It wasn't just their presence that startled him. It was the look in their eyes. The kind of look he remembered from his own childhood. The look of children who had already learned too much about pain. He closed the door slowly and walked toward them. His footsteps echoed against the wet pavement. "Are you lost?" he asked gently, lowering himself to their eye level. The girls looked at each other for a moment, unsure if they should speak. Then Lily, voice trembling but clear, said the words that pierced through him like a blade. "Our daddy left us." Alexander blinked, stunned. "What do you mean? He'll come back, right?" Chloe shook her head and whispered, "He said he'd be right back. That was yesterday." Silence fell between them. His mind reeled. A grown man. Their father. He had abandoned two children, his own children, at a bus stop like they were nothing. Left them to sleep God knows where, to survive in the cold with no food, no protection, no idea if help would come. Rage flared inside Alexander, mixing with a deep sorrow that he hadn't felt in years. He looked at them, so small, so lost, and felt something shift inside him. He didn't ask for it. He didn't expect it. But in that moment, the man who had everything felt like he had nothing unless he did something for them. He took a breath. Then, "I guess I'm your dad now." The girls stared at him, not quite understanding. But they didn't run. They didn't protest. Instead, Lily stepped forward and put her tiny hand in his. And just like that, everything changed. The ride back to Alexander Blake's penthouse was quiet. The two little girls sat in the back seat beside him, their legs dangling over the edge of the plush leather seats, their eyes wide and cautious as they watched the city blur past the window. Chloe sat closest to him, clutching her backpack like it was her only anchor in the world, while Lily rested her head against the window, her breath fogging up the glass as raindrops raced down its surface. Alexander watched them both in silence, his mind trying to make sense of what he had just done. Just hours ago, he had been on his way home after another long meeting, ready to bury himself in reports and figures and contracts. Now, he had two children in his car. Two girls who had been left by their father at a bus stop like discarded objects. Two children who had nobody else. When they pulled up in front of the modern high-rise tower, the doorman opened the car door with his usual professional composure but raised an eyebrow at the sight of the children. Alexander said nothing and simply nodded toward the elevator. The girls followed him wordlessly, their footsteps soft against the marble floor, their eyes darting around at the unfamiliar luxury of the building. The elevator ride to the top floor was quiet, though Lily glanced at the glowing numbers with interest, as if she had never seen anything so high. When they stepped into the penthouse, Chloe immediately stopped in the doorway. The space was vast and sterile, floor-to-ceiling windows, marble floors, polished chrome, and minimal furniture. It looked more like a showroom than a home. There were no toys, no color, no sign that a child had ever stepped foot inside. The silence was almost overwhelming. Lily stepped in behind her and looked around, her small voice finally breaking the stillness. "Is this your house?" Alexander nodded, setting his keys down on the console. "It's really clean," Chloe said quietly, as if unsure whether that was a good thing. He turned to them, unsure of what came next. He had never been around children. He had never raised anyone, not even a pet. His world was one of control, precision, silence, and independence. But none of that helped him now. These girls needed something else, something he wasn't sure he could give. "Martha," he called out. Within seconds, a woman in her 60s appeared from the hallway. She wore a crisp uniform and had a sharp, no-nonsense face, but her expression softened the moment she saw the children. "Oh, my goodness," she murmured. "Are they?" Alexander interrupted. "They're staying. I need you to find something for them to eat. And, maybe something warmer to wear." Martha blinked, then nodded. "Right away." The girls followed her hesitantly into the kitchen while Alexander stood alone in the vast living room. He stared out at the city skyline, a glass of untouched whiskey still on the bar where he had left it that morning. He wasn't sure what he had expected. Gratitude? Relief? Some magical feeling that would assure him he was doing the right thing? But all he felt was uncertainty and a weight he couldn't describe pressing down on his chest. Later that evening, after grilled cheese sandwiches and hot cocoa made with real chocolate, Martha's idea, not his, the girls sat curled up on the large sofa, wrapped in cashmere blankets that dwarfed their tiny frames. They were more relaxed now, though still far from comfortable. They didn't ask many questions. They didn't cry. That was what struck him the most. They were too quiet. He sat across from them, watching as they stared at the television with glassy eyes, not really seeing it. Finally, Lily turned to him. "Do we have to leave tomorrow?" He shook his head. "No. You can stay here as long as you want." Chloe looked up. "Even forever?" Alexander hesitated. Forever was a long time. It was a promise that frightened him more than any business deal ever had. But when he saw the way they looked at him, two fragile lives looking for a single sign of safety, he didn't flinch. Yes. Even forever. That night, he showed them to the guest bedroom. It was impersonal, like the rest of the apartment, but Martha had already changed the bedding to something softer and warmer. She had even found a stuffed animal in the storage closet from years ago, something left behind by a guest's child. Chloe clutched it tightly as she climbed into the bed beside her sister. Alexander stood in the doorway, unsure if he should say something. "Do you need anything else?" he asked. Lily shook her head sleepily. Can you leave the door open?" He nodded. "Of course." Just as he turned to go, Chloe's voice stopped him. "Are you really gonna be our new dad?" He turned back slowly, then walked to the edge of the bed. He knelt down so he was at eye level. "I don't know how to be a dad," he said honestly. "But I'm going to try. As hard as I can." Chloe gave a small nod, then tucked her head under the blanket. Lily whispered a soft, "good night," and the room fell into silence. Alexander stood in the hallway for a long time after they had fallen asleep. He looked around at the cold, lifeless space he had called home for so many years. It suddenly felt wrong. Too big. Too empty. And for the first time in as long as he could remember, he felt something stir in his chest that wasn't pride or ambition or control. It was something deeper. Something painful and beautiful at once. He didn't know where this journey would lead. But he knew one thing. It had already begun. The following morning came slowly, with sunlight filtering gently through the tall windows of the penthouse. For once, Alexander didn't wake to the sound of email notifications or back-to-back calendar alerts. Instead, he awoke to silence, an unfamiliar kind of silence, one filled not with emptiness, but with the faint sounds of breathing, the soft creaking of the wooden floor, and the distant murmur of voices down the hall. It took him a moment to remember everything that had happened the day before. The bus stop. The little girls. The promise he made. Still in his robe, he stepped into the hallway and followed the sounds toward the kitchen, where he found Martha at the stove flipping pancakes, and Chloe sitting at the table, swinging her legs and watching the sizzling pan with quiet fascination. Lily was drawing something with crayons on the back of a printed financial report. She looked up when she saw him and offered a shy smile. There was something indescribable in that expression, hope, maybe, or trust, but it hit him harder than he expected. He nodded back, unsure what to say, and poured himself a coffee. The rest of the morning passed quietly. He cancelled his meetings for the day, something his assistant had never heard him do in 10 years. But Alexander didn't care. There were more pressing things now. As the girls finished breakfast and explored the apartment like cautious tourists, he made a call to his lawyer, Ethan Cole. A trusted partner in both legal and personal matters, Ethan was one of the few people Alexander considered more than just a business associate. "I need to adopt 2 children," Alexander said without any preamble. There was a pause on the other end of the line, then a dry response. "You've been up for less than 24 hours and you already found a way to destabilize your entire life." "I'm serious, Ethan. 2 girls. Sisters. 5 years old. Abandoned. No mother. The father left them on the street. That's unbelievable. I found them myself. At a bus stop. They said their dad left and never came back." Ethan's tone changed. "Are they with you now?" "Yes. And they're staying." "All right. Then I need names, dates of birth, any information they can give you. I'll start the paperwork, but you'll also need to involve Child Protective Services. There's a process, even for you." "I don't care how long it takes," Alexander said firmly. "Make it happen." After the call, he sat down at the kitchen table with the girls. "I need to ask you a few questions," he said gently. "Just so I can help you stay here. Is that okay?" They both nodded. Lily spoke first. "Our mommy died. A long time ago. In a car accident. We lived with Daddy after that." Chloe added softly, "But he was always angry. He yelled a lot. Sometimes he didn't come home." "Do you know his name?" Alexander asked. "Trevor. Trevor Hudson," Lily said quietly. Alexander wrote it down. "And do you remember your birthday?" "May 12th, Chloe said. "We're twins." He smiled a little at the obviousness of the answer and continued. "Do you have any grandparents? Aunts or uncles?" They both shook their heads. "No one ever came," Lily said. "Just us and him." Alexander's chest tightened. He had known pain in his own life, loneliness, betrayal, loss, but he had always had resources, choices. These girls had nothing. Nothing but him now. Within hours, Ethan began gathering information on Trevor Hudson. What surfaced confirmed everything Alexander feared. Trevor had a long record, multiple arrests for drug possession, theft, and one for domestic disturbance. There were no known relatives, no legal guardians on record. The girls were, in the eyes of the system, completely abandoned. Child Protective Services arrived the next day. A stern-faced woman named Karen entered the apartment and sat with Alexander in the formal lounge. She was cautious, perhaps suspicious at first, given the nature of the case. "You understand that this isn't just about taking them in," she said. "There's a legal process. Background checks. Home evaluations. Psychological assessments." "I understand," Alexander replied. "And I'm prepared to do all of it." She looked him over. "You're a CEO. You live alone. You have no parenting experience. Why would you want this responsibility?" He paused for a moment before answering. "Because I saw them. I saw how scared they were, and I couldn't walk away. I don't care if it makes sense on paper. I care that they're safe." Karen's expression softened, just a little. She stood. "We'll begin the process. But it won't be quick." "I don't need quick," Alexander said. "I need permanent." That night, when the girls went to bed, Alexander stood in the hallway and looked at their door. The light was on, the shadows of their heads outlined softly on the wall. He felt something he couldn't name, something fierce and protective and raw. He wasn't sure if it was love yet. But it was something close. He went back to his office and opened a drawer he hadn't touched in years. Inside was a photograph, his own mother, holding him when he was barely older than Lily and Chloe. She had died young. His father had been distant, cold, focused only on business. Alexander had been raised by boarding schools and nannies. No one had ever fought for him. No one had ever stayed. He closed the drawer slowly. He would not let history repeat itself. Not this time. Not with them. Time moved differently after the girls became part of Alexander Blake's life. What had once been a meticulously controlled existence ruled by meetings, flights, contracts, and deadlines now pulsed with a softer, more chaotic rhythm. It was the sound of small footsteps padding across marble floors in the early morning, the echo of high-pitched laughter bouncing off glass walls, and the unexpected shrieks that accompanied spilled juice or dropped crayons. At first, it was overwhelming. His penthouse, once pristine and sterile, slowly began to transform. Pink socks ended up under the coffee table, tiny hair ties appeared in the sink, and colorful drawings filled with smiling stick figures were taped unevenly to his office door. Alexander adjusted, awkwardly at first, and then with quiet determination. He started waking up earlier so he could eat breakfast with Lily and Chloe, learning quickly that they liked their toast cut into triangles, not squares, and that Lily refused to drink orange juice with pulp. He read parenting books late into the night, took notes during their pediatrician visits, and learned how to braid hair by watching online tutorials in the dark when the girls were asleep. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, he changed. And the girls changed too. Lily, who had once flinched at sudden noises, began to hum while drawing at the kitchen table. Chloe, who used to sleep curled up like a frightened animal, started asking if she could leave her bedroom door halfway open, not fully. They still had nightmares sometimes, especially during thunderstorms, but they no longer woke up in a panic. Instead, they called softly for him, and he came every time, sitting at the edge of their bed until they fell asleep again. Alexander's staff, who had once tiptoed around him in silence, now smiled openly when the girls raced through the hallways or asked 1,000 questions about the paintings on the walls. Martha, who had run the household with the precision of a military officer, became something like a grandmother to them, often scolding Alexander playfully when he forgot to pack an extra sweater in Chloe's school bag or missed the order of bedtime stories. 6 months passed like that. Then a year. And soon, Alexander could no longer remember what his life had looked like without them. His calendar still filled up with meetings, but he left the office earlier now. His phone still rang with deals and boardroom crises, but he learned to silence it during dinner. He no longer judged the value of a day by its profit margins, but by the sound of the girls laughing or the weight of their arms around his neck when they hugged him goodnight. He began to invest not just in them, but in what they had come from. He donated anonymously to shelters and built several new foster care facilities in low-income areas, ensuring that no child abandoned like Lily and Chloe would ever be as forgotten as they were. He visited some of those places in person, something that stunned his business associates and confused the press, but he never gave interviews or explained himself. He didn't need to. Despite all the warmth that had taken root in his home, a quiet fear still lived inside Alexander. It wasn't always there, but it crept up during quiet nights or when the girls brought home drawings of a family that included him in crayon next to them, with the label, Dad. It was the nagging reminder that none of this was yet final in the eyes of the law. The adoption process was still underway. Paperwork, home visits, interviews, everything was moving forward, but he knew it wasn't complete. Somewhere out there, Trevor Hudson, their biological father, still existed. Alexander didn't speak about him to the girls. Not because he wanted to erase the past, but because they never brought him up again. It was as if they had sealed that chapter away in a box too heavy to open. But Alexander had not forgotten. He had people tracking Trevor's whereabouts, not out of vengeance, but out of caution. He needed to be ready, for anything. And yet, even with that shadow looming, life continued. Lily and Chloe started kindergarten at a prestigious private school, arriving hand in hand each morning with Alexander walking between them, briefcase in one hand and Chloe's sparkly lunchbox in the other. The teachers whispered that he was intimidating, but the girls glowed whenever he stepped through the school gates. He attended every parent meeting, showed up to every performance, and even learned the names of their classmates. On weekends, they went to the zoo, rode bikes in Central Park, and baked cookies that always ended up burned at the edges. Chloe liked to paint, often leaving splotches of blue and yellow across the kitchen floor, while Lily had become obsessed with astronomy and insisted on stargazing from the rooftop balcony even on chilly nights. Alexander began to feel something he hadn't felt in decades, peace. Not the kind that came from silence or solitude, but the kind that came from purpose. He no longer questioned whether he had done the right thing that day at the bus stop. Every time Chloe reached for his hand without thinking or Lily fell asleep against his chest, he knew. He wasn't just filling a role. He had become their father. And yet, somewhere deep within, he sensed a storm building. A storm that would test everything they had built. But for now, he let himself rest in the moment, even as he stood at the edge of it, knowing the future could still demand more than he was ready to give. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon, one of those calm, golden days when everything seemed almost too perfect. The girls had just returned from school, their backpacks thudding to the floor as they ran toward the kitchen where the smell of fresh banana bread filled the air. Chloe was telling Martha about her painting project, and Lily excitedly pulled a glitter-covered worksheet from her folder to show Alexander. He had just come home from a board meeting, still wearing his suit, but had loosened his tie and knelt down to see the drawing she held out proudly. Moments like this had become the new normal. Peaceful. Predictable. Happy. And then the intercom buzzed. It wasn't unusual to get unexpected visitors, couriers, building staff, even last-minute consultants, but something about the sound of that buzz made Alexander freeze. He stood up slowly and pressed the security button. A grainy video image appeared on the small screen beside the door. A man stood there, slouched and pale, his hair disheveled and his eyes sunken. He wore a faded denim jacket, stained at the collar, and behind him stood a sharp-eyed lawyer in a pressed gray suit. For a long moment, Alexander just stared. Trevor Hudson. He had changed since the photos from the private investigators' reports, a little thinner, a little more alert, but still carrying that hollow look of a man who had spent years crawling out of darkness. Alexander felt a heat rise in his chest, not just anger but something more primal. Protective. He turned off the screen and strode down the hallway toward the entryway, heart pounding, jaw clenched. He opened the door only halfway. Trevor didn't hesitate. "I'm here for my daughters." There was no apology in his voice. No humility. Just a claim spoken like a right. Alexander's eyes narrowed. "They're not yours anymore." Trevor's lawyer stepped forward. "Mr. Blake, this is a formal notice. Mr. Hudson has completed a rehabilitation program, secured stable housing, and is now seeking to regain custody of his children. We are prepared to file a petition through family court." Alexander stepped fully into the doorway, squaring his shoulders. "You abandoned them at a bus stop." Trevor's jaw tightened. "I was sick. I was lost. But I've changed. Alexander didn't raise his voice, didn't shout, but the words he spoke came with such sharpness that they cut through the air like glass. You left 2 5-year-old girls alone for 2 days. No food. No shelter. They could have been taken. Hurt. Killed. Trevor looked away, and for a flicker of a moment, guilt cracked through his expression. But it vanished just as quickly. They're my blood. I have a right. They cried themselves to sleep for weeks, Alexander said coldly. They still wake up afraid sometimes. You weren't a father, you were their trauma. The lawyer cleared his throat. We'll let the court decide. Alexander slammed the door without another word. That night was heavy. He didn't tell the girls. He didn't want to see fear in their eyes again. He just sat in his study long after they had gone to bed, a single lamp casting a pool of yellow light across the paperwork in front of him. His hands rested on the official adoption documents, still incomplete, still tangled in bureaucracy. Ethan, his lawyer, had warned him of this possibility, that if Trevor reappeared during the process and proved rehabilitation, he could contest parental rights. The law didn't always care about love. It cared about bloodlines and loopholes. Over the next few days, everything began to shift. Meetings with legal teams stretched into the night. A court date was set. Martha kept the girls distracted with stories and baking projects, while Alexander spent every spare moment preparing. He wasn't just fighting to keep them, he was fighting for their safety, their peace, their entire future. When he finally sat down with them to explain what was happening, it was a quiet Saturday morning. He gathered them on the couch, each sitting on either side of him, their small hands in his. There's something I need to tell you, he said gently. Your father, the man who left you, is trying to come back. Chloe gripped his arm tightly. Why? Alexander looked into her eyes. I don't know. Maybe because he's better now. Maybe because he thinks he deserves another chance. Lily looked away. We don't want him. I know, he said. But there's going to be a court hearing. A judge is going to decide who you live with. I've already told them that I love you. That you are my family. But they might ask you questions too. Lily's eyes filled with tears. Are they going to take us away? No, he said firmly. Not if I have anything to say about it. And I do. I promise you, I will do everything in my power to keep you safe. To keep you with me. Neither girl said anything for a long time. Then Chloe whispered, will the judge believe us? I hope so, Alexander said quietly. But I think it will help if you tell the truth. Just be honest about how you feel. That's all anyone can ask of you. In the days leading up to the trial, the energy in the apartment changed. It became tense, uncertain. The girls were quieter. They clung to him more, followed him from room to room as if afraid he might disappear. And Alexander, despite his calm exterior, felt like something inside him was unraveling. He had built empires. Negotiated billion-dollar deals. Faced down boards of directors and ruthless competitors. But nothing had ever frightened him like the thought of losing them. On the morning of the hearing, the girls wore matching navy dresses, their hair tied back with white ribbons. Alexander wore a simple dark suit, nothing flashy. He didn't want to look like a man trying to buy a family. He wanted to be seen as what he truly was, a father who would give everything, even his own life, to protect his children. As they drove to the courthouse, neither girl spoke. Chloe held Lily's hand the whole way, their fingers intertwined in silent solidarity. When they arrived, reporters were already outside, snapping photos, whispering about the CEO and the orphans he took in. But Alexander ignored them. He walked with the girls between him, one hand resting protectively on each of their shoulders. Inside the courtroom, everything felt cold and formal. The judge, an older woman with silver hair and tired eyes, called the room to order. Trevor sat across from them, cleaned up but still carrying that same bitter tension in his shoulders. As the proceedings began, Alexander sat straight, spoke clearly, answered every question with measured sincerity. Ethan presented evidence, doctor's notes, therapist reports, school records, glowing references from teachers, pediatricians, and Martha. But the real weight of the case came when Lily and Chloe were called to speak. They entered the witness room nervously, sitting side by side on the small bench. Chloe looked at the judge first and said, with a trembling voice, "We don't want to go with him. He left us. He said he was coming back and never did. We waited, and we were so cold." Lily took a breath and added, "We were scared all the time. But then Mr. Blake came. He made us feel safe. He reads us stories. He holds our hands. He never leaves." The courtroom fell silent. Even Trevor didn't move. And somewhere, deep in Alexander's chest, a flicker of hope bloomed. They weren't just defending him. They were defending their home. Their family. Their right to never be abandoned again. The courtroom was still when the girls finished speaking, their small voices lingering in the air like echoes of something too fragile to touch. For a moment, no one moved. The judge remained silent, her eyes fixed on the twins, her expression unreadable. Alexander sat frozen at the table beside his attorney, his hands clenched tightly in his lap, willing himself not to show the storm inside. He wanted to run to them, to hold them, to tell them it was over, but the law didn't move on emotions, it moved on process. The judge gently dismissed the girls from the room, assigning a court-appointed aide to escort them to a quiet space down the hall where they could wait. As they left, Chloe turned around one last time to look at Alexander. She didn't say anything, but her eyes said enough. She was afraid, and she trusted him to make it okay. The rest of the proceedings blurred together into a haze of testimonies, counterarguments, and evidence submission. Trevor's lawyer pushed a carefully crafted narrative of redemption, a man who had made mistakes, paid the price, sought help, and now deserved a second chance. They emphasized the importance of biological ties, of a parent's right to reconnect, and how denying him would be an irreversible punishment after his effort to recover. Trevor himself spoke at one point, his tone measured, rehearsed, almost too calm. He admitted to his past but swore he was clean, that he had a stable job now, a rented apartment, a support sponsor. He said he thought about his daughters every day, that he regretted what he had done, and that he just wanted to be a father again. Alexander sat motionless during all of it, watching every word, studying the judge's face, searching for any sign of which way she leaned. He knew the law could be cruelly impartial. He had spent his life navigating systems that often ignored emotion in favor of structure. But this wasn't a boardroom. This was life, family, love, trauma. And still, it would come down to a stranger in a robe with the power to undo everything he had built with Lily and Chloe. Then came his turn to speak. He stood slowly, approached the stand, and looked out at the court with a calm that belied the pressure inside him. He didn't rehearse what he said. He didn't bring notes. His voice was steady but soft, and the silence that fell over the room was absolute as he began. "I don't have biological children. I never thought I would. My life was my work, my company, my solitude. That was my choice. But I met Lily and Chloe on a cold evening. They were standing alone at a bus stop, abandoned, waiting for a man who never returned. They were 5 years old. They had no food, no coats, no idea if anyone in the world even cared they existed. I saw them, and I couldn't walk away. I didn't plan to become a father. But in that moment, I knew I had to be." He paused, his eyes searching the judges. "In the time since then, I've watched them go from silence to laughter, from fear to joy. I've watched them sleep through the night without waking up screaming. I've seen them dance in the kitchen. They trust me. They look to me not because I gave them life, but because I gave them safety. I'm not trying to erase their past. I just want to give them a future." There was no response from the judge, no nod, no expression of approval. Just the mechanical click of a pen as she took notes. When Alexander stepped down from the stand, he avoided looking at Trevor, who sat with his hands folded tightly in front of him, his jaw locked, his eyes burning with a mix of frustration and helplessness. Closing arguments were made. The court recessed for an hour to allow the judge time to deliberate. The hallway outside the courtroom filled with a tense silence broken only by the occasional whisper of attorneys and clerks moving past. Alexander paced slowly, stopping only when Martha arrived with the girls. They ran to him the moment they saw him, Chloe hiding her face against his leg, Lily clinging to his coat. He bent down to their level, kissed the top of each head, and held them tightly. "No matter what happens in there," he whispered, "I love you both. That will never change." They nodded, but said nothing. When the bailiff called everyone back in, Alexander's heart pounded so loudly he could barely hear the creak of the courtroom door. The judge was already seated when he stepped inside, her face calm but serious, her hands folded neatly on the bench. Everyone sat. The girls stayed just outside, guarded gently by the aide, their small shapes visible through the glass panel. The judge cleared her throat, and her voice, though gentle, filled the room with finality. "I have reviewed the case of Hudson versus Blake, along with all provided testimony, documentation, and expert evaluations. This case concerns not just legal guardianship, but the psychological and emotional stability of two vulnerable children. While it is commendable that Mr. Hudson has made efforts to rehabilitate himself, the court cannot overlook the gravity of his past decisions, particularly the abandonment of his children during a time of extreme vulnerability. Furthermore, it is the opinion of this court, based on therapist evaluations and direct interviews with the minors, that their emotional bond with Mr. Blake constitutes the only secure and consistent parental relationship they have known." She paused and looked up directly at Alexander. "Therefore, it is the ruling of this court that full legal custody of Lily and Chloe Hudson be awarded to Alexander Blake, with all parental rights of Trevor Hudson permanently terminated." There was no applause. No cheers. Only breath, shaky, relieved, overwhelming breath as the decision settled in the room like sunlight after a long storm. Trevor's shoulders sagged. He didn't argue. He didn't speak. He simply stood and walked out, his lawyer following behind him without a word. Alexander sat back in his seat, unable to move for a moment. His hands trembled, though his face remained still. It was over. The fight he had feared from the beginning, the one that had kept him awake so many nights, had ended in the only way that ever felt right. Outside the courtroom, he knelt again to the girls. They looked up at him with cautious eyes, afraid to ask. "It's done," he said softly. "You're staying with me. Forever." And for the first time in months, he saw it, pure, unguarded joy. Lily wrapped her arms around his neck. Chloe kissed his cheek. Martha stood nearby, wiping tears from her face. That night, back at the apartment, the city sparkled beyond the windows, and laughter echoed through every room. For the first time, their home didn't just feel like a place. It felt like a beginning. The weeks following the court's decision brought a quiet sense of peace that Alexander had never known before. It was not the kind of peace found in silence or isolation, the kind he had built his life around in his cold, glass-walled apartment, but the kind born from belonging, from love that asked nothing and gave everything. The fear that had shadowed every step of the adoption process slowly began to fade, replaced by a newfound certainty. Lily and Chloe were no longer just two girls who happened to enter his life. They were his daughters now, legally, emotionally, fully. Every morning felt different now. He no longer needed an alarm to wake up. The sound of tiny footsteps running down the hallway or soft giggles outside his bedroom door was enough. Lily had taken to drawing morning notes for him, leaving crayon-scribbled hearts and stick-figure families taped to his coffee cup before school. Chloe, more reserved but just as affectionate, often surprised him with a quick hug around the waist while he read the morning paper, as if she was checking to make sure he was still there. The adoption was finalized in a quiet courtroom without cameras or reporters, but the day they received their new birth certificates, listing Alexander Blake as their father, he knew it was a moment he would never forget. They celebrated at home with pizza on the floor of the living room, a cake that Martha baked herself, and handmade paper crowns with glitter and glue. Lily insisted on calling it their Forever Day, and the name stuck. Alexander had lived a life filled with milestones, mergers, IPOs, international recognition, but none of those achievements had ever made his hands shake the way they did when the girls called him Dad without hesitation or doubt. It was a word they had once said with uncertainty, as if testing its shape in their mouths. Now, it was effortless. Natural. Real. With the legal battle behind them, life settled into something that looked almost ordinary, though Alexander often marveled at how extraordinary it felt. Weekends became sacred. Instead of business calls and emails, his Saturdays were filled with library visits, art projects, and trips to the park. He bought bikes for the girls, bright pink and turquoise with tassels on the handlebars, and ran alongside them as they learned to ride through Central Park. He was out of breath within minutes, but the sight of Chloe balancing for the first time without training wheels made him laugh like he hadn't in years. He also started learning things he had never expected to care about: how to sew buttons on tiny jackets, how to braid double French braids for school picture day, which brand of glitter glue didn't stain the couch. At night, he read to them from the same chair in the corner of their room, sometimes nodding off halfway through a story, only to be gently nudged awake by Chloe, who always caught him. And though the house was still elegant and modern, it now reflected the life inside it. The white marble countertops bore faint scratches from art supplies and cookie cutters. The walls had spots where stickers had been hastily removed. There were fingerprints on the windows and toys under the sofa. But Alexander didn't mind. In fact, he came to see those imperfections as the very proof that this place was now a home. One day, while reorganizing his home office, he found the folder where he'd kept all the paperwork from the custody case, the court transcripts, psychological evaluations, legal documents, witness statements. He sat with it for a while, flipping through the pages, remembering the fear and anger and helplessness. But he didn't feel the same weight anymore. The past had been brutal, but it no longer defined them. It was part of their story, not the end of it. He carefully placed the folder back into a drawer and instead took out something else, a small velvet box. Inside were two identical silver necklaces, each with a single engraved charm. He had been planning them for months. That evening, after dinner, he knelt in front of the girls, who were sitting cross-legged on the living room rug, building towers out of dominoes. "I have something for you," he said quietly. They looked up, curious. He opened the box. Inside lay two delicate chains. Each charm read, in simple letters, "Forever Dad." Lily gasped. Chloe stared, wide-eyed. He placed the necklaces in their palms. "I know this doesn't make me your dad by blood. But I want you to know that I'm your dad in every way that matters. Forever." The girls didn't answer with words. Lily wrapped her arms around his neck. Chloe followed, quieter but just as sure. That night, after they fell asleep with the necklaces still around their necks, Alexander sat by their door for a long time. He watched the steady rise and fall of their breathing, the peaceful expressions on their faces, and felt something he had once believed was impossible for a man like him: complete contentment. He was no longer the man who walked alone through cold lobbies and empty halls. He was a father. A protector. A home. And now, with the past behind them and the future ahead, he knew there was nothing left to fear. The final day of the school year arrived with the kind of clear blue sky that seemed to make everything feel brighter. The sun poured into the apartment from the east-facing windows as Alexander helped the girls get ready for their school's end-of-year concert. It was the first performance Lily and Chloe would participate in since they started attending the academy, and they had spent the last few weeks practicing every evening, singing in the kitchen, humming in the car, reciting lines of their song with increasing confidence. They were going to perform in front of hundreds of parents, teachers, and classmates, and while Chloe had been nervous at first, Alexander had noticed a quiet confidence building in both of them. That morning, he made them pancakes shaped like stars, a tradition they had created together on special days. Chloe wore a light blue dress with silver ballet flats, while Lily chose her favorite yellow dress with a ribbon that Alexander had tied into her hair himself, struggling with the knot before Martha stepped in to help. The twins buzzed with excitement, their eyes wide and voices filled with energy as they chattered about where their friends would be sitting, who would go first, and whether or not the lights would be too bright on stage. Alexander had cleared his entire day for the event. He arrived at the school early and sat in the second row of the large auditorium, holding a small bouquet of white daisies wrapped in a purple ribbon, their favorite flowers. He wore a simple suit, nothing flashy, just something respectful and formal enough for the occasion. He could feel a strange tightness in his chest, not from nerves, but from something deeper, a realization that this moment, seemingly so small, symbolized everything they had overcome. When the curtains opened, the stage filled with children in bright outfits, arranged in neat rows, their voices rising in a sweet, slightly off-key harmony. It was innocent and chaotic in the way only young children's performances could be, and Alexander couldn't help smiling as he scanned the stage for two very familiar faces. He spotted them quickly, center row, side by side, holding hands, standing proudly under the soft stage lights. The song they sang was simple, about home and family, about feeling safe, about love. The lyrics had seemed trivial when he'd first read them in the program, but hearing them come from the mouths of his daughters, voices that once trembled with fear, now singing with joy, felt nothing short of profound. As the last note faded and the audience broke into applause, Lily and Chloe stepped forward. Alexander hadn't known they would speak, but a teacher handed them a microphone, and the auditorium quieted again. Lily cleared her throat and looked out at the sea of faces. Her voice was a little shaky at first, but she didn't falter. "We want to say thank you," she began, glancing at Chloe, who smiled and gave a small nod. "This year, we got to do something we never thought we'd do. We got to have a real home." Chloe took the microphone next, her grip tight but her voice clear. "We used to be scared a lot. We didn't know what was going to happen to us. But now we do. We have a dad. Not the kind you get born with. The kind who shows up and stays." Lily looked straight at Alexander. This song was for him. The room erupted in applause again, but Alexander didn't move at first. He felt rooted to the spot, his throat tight, his eyes burning. He wasn't the kind of man who cried easily, but in that moment, he had no defense left. Everything they had endured, the fear, the court, the nights of uncertainty, led to this, two little girls standing tall, speaking from a stage, claiming him as their own without hesitation. And in front of everyone, they made him more than a father. They made him a reason. After the concert, as the crowd filed out, Alexander made his way to the stage. The girls ran to him, arms wide, their smiles lighting up their faces. He dropped to his knees and wrapped them both in a tight embrace, the flowers forgotten for a moment as he whispered how proud he was, over and over again. Chloe giggled into his shoulder, and Lily whispered, "We saw you crying," with mock scandal. He smiled, wiping his eyes. "Only a little," he admitted. That evening, they went out for ice cream at their favorite corner shop, the one with the hand-drawn chalkboard menus and the bell that rang every time the door opened. Alexander let them each pick 2 scoops, no restrictions, and they sat outside on the bench as the sun dipped behind the buildings, licking melting strawberry and chocolate from their fingers. He didn't check his phone once. The world beyond this small circle of joy could wait. When they returned home, the girls asked him to read one of their favorite books. They climbed onto the couch in their pajamas, snuggled under a soft blanket, and leaned into him as he turned the pages. Halfway through, Lily yawned and rested her head against his chest. Chloe followed, already half asleep. He didn't stop reading. He continued softly, even after their breathing deepened and their hands slipped from the book. Later, when he carried them to bed, first Chloe, then Lily, he paused at the doorway, just as he always did, watching them in the glow of their nightlight. The necklaces still hung around their necks, a little tangled from sleep, the engraved words barely visible in the dim light, "Forever Dad." Alexander stood there for a long moment, not thinking about business or legacy or wealth, but about how much of life he had almost missed. He thought about the man he had been, the one who walked through life untouched, guarded, unknowingly empty, and the man he had become. He thought about how love had arrived not as a plan or a choice, but as 2 small girls left on a street corner, needing someone who would not walk away. And he thought, with the deepest certainty he had ever known, that this was his greatest success, not the company, not the fortune, not the name. Them. A quiet breath left his lips as he turned off the light, whispering, "Good night, my girls." And for the first time in his life, Alexander Blake felt not like a man who had everything, but like a man who had finally come home. This story, at its core, is not about wealth, power, or even tragedy, it's about healing. It's about how love often arrives in the most unexpected form, disrupting everything you thought you knew about life, and quietly rebuilding something stronger from the ruins. Alexander didn't set out to become a father, and the girls didn't ask for a hero, but somehow, through pain, risk, and choice, they found each other. The ending is powerful not because it ties things up neatly, but because it feels real. It's not a fairy tale, there are scars, there's trauma, there's the lingering weight of what was lost. But there's also warmth, safety, and a kind of quiet, unwavering love that doesn't need grand gestures to feel enormous. For me, the most beautiful part of this ending isn't that the girls finally have a home, it's that Alexander does too. And neither of them even realized they were missing one until they found it in each other. That's what gives this story its emotional gravity, not the drama, but the quiet miracle of connection. It reminds us that family isn't made by blood. It's made by presence, by choice, and by the courage to stay.